Hello, brothers, and welcome to Heroic Stories. It's a series to strengthen Catholic men with real stories of heroic grit and faith, and it's brought to you from heroicmen.org. I'm your host, Dominic from Heroic Men. Each week, I sit down with a guest to ask them how they made it through their darkest moments, who their heroes were, and who they want to be a hero for. These are real men who've battled doubt, they've sought purpose, and they've changed their lives in ways that can inspire you and me to do the same. These are the stories that remind us that heroism isn't born, it's made. Hey friends, and welcome back to Heroic Stories. I'm privileged to be joined today by Jay Wonacott. You're the director of, is it Faith and Family out of Boise?
It's actually marriage and family life and respect life. So that's the area where I have done most of my professional life in terms of the life of the church. Went to the JP2 Institute in Washington, D.C. and studied the thought of John Paul II in particular. And then since then, that's been the mid-90s, I have been in the life of the church. Just worked in the Archdiocese of Portland for a time, Ascension Press for a while. Worked in the real world, as they say, for a while, doing some tech writing, and then got back into church ministry the last maybe 10, 12 years, and been in this position almost 10 years, almost a decade. It'll be a decade in January that I have put in here. And we basically, and kind of the inaugural, kind of the founding member of this office here, because I spoke to our bishop almost 10 years ago and said, marriage and family is such an important element of our church and our life. I had this background, wanted to bring this to my native state here in Idaho. And so it was just a great opportunity for me. After he said, yes, let's open something to begin working on that. So it's been my life's work, kind of a dream job in a way, I would say, to be able to work in this area and just have a passion for it, a love for it. I'm a father of 5 daughters myself, been married now 29 years. So we'll have our big 30 next year. So that's me. That's who I am. And so just glad to be part of this conversation about heroic men. And I've gotten to know the organization, the Catholic Men's Leadership Alliance and Heroic Men over the last probably 3 years. Been to a couple of the conferences, and I've gotten to know some good people, especially Chris Mann. I think we know Chris in common, and Chris is one of our region leaders here. I kind of try to help out here in Region 12. So anyway, it's good to be with you.
Thanks for saying that. No, it's good to take a moment and sit with you because your name has come up a bunch of times. You've been involved with us, as you've mentioned, for the last 3 years. By the way, you said that you're a dad with 5 daughters. I'm clocking in 13 years this year, and we've been gifted 1 daughter. So we're both trying to figure out how to be this, follow this heroic path, we should say, with a lot of wonderful women that we're taking care of and working with. So I'm curious to get into it with this concept of heroism, right? I think that as men, we have certain stories that we turn to in our minds when we think of men who have been heroic, either in literature or in stories or real life or the news or people we've known. What's a story of somebody who's absolutely an inspiration to you? You like to bring it up when you sit down with coffee or beer with a couple of friends and go, here's a story that just sets me on fire every time.
Oh my gosh, there's so many good ones. I love to read, and so that's part of I have several swirling around in my head, but I would say that there are a couple of large figures on the scene that I just finished a book. One of my favorite authors is a guy named David McCullough. I don't know if you've ever heard of David McCullough. He wrote...
I think so.
Popular author. He's written many books, especially about American history. He wrote a book about John Adams. They made an HBO show about that. David McCullough also wrote a really beautiful book about Harry S. Truman, which is an American president. And then, of course, he wrote a wonderful book about the year 1776 and the founding of the country and the heroism, if you will. I mean, it's kind of fresh in my mind because I just finished that book a couple of months ago, 1776. And particularly, he highlights the figure of George Washington. And kind of, at least for me, I love the story of Washington in that way as the founder of our country, this great general. But throughout McCullough's understanding of Washington, you get a real sense of, just a giant among men in terms of how he presented himself. In 1776, you see what the United States, or then at the time the colonies, were up against in terms of the British power, the most powerful nation in the world, probably the British monarchy, and the the things that Washington faced with this ragtag militia. He brought a dignity of being a farmer to this role as the general, kind of a reluctant, I would say a reluctant leader in the sense that I don't think he wanted it totally, but then he took on the mantle to do it. He did it with a steadfastness, and he faced many just difficulties that you'd see, especially, they had this great victory in Boston, and then they got pushed back to New York. And then after New York, it was just one failure after another until they were pushed down to the Delaware. And then that whole idea that the crossing of the Delaware and this part of American history where the tide begins to turn, if you will, in terms of the America's ability to say we need to come under a unity, we need to come under a vision, if you will, of a leader that's going to help us move forward. So I'm always struck by George Washington. He's just been on the brain a little bit in terms of kind of an American hero, someone that we think of as, again, a founder, but also someone who's really faced great difficulty, and would say that he was a hero, and that maybe God's hand was particularly on his life. I've heard many different sort of stories about, bullets passing through his cloak, and he was protected by God in a kind of a beautiful way to do what he was able to do to bring out the birth of our country. And I think also too, at the end of his life, there's that great, it's kind of fun. My daughters particularly like the musical Hamilton, and there's a part in Hamilton where they sing a song about, this is it, this is his final farewell. And I think that's a very famous part of what he could have become, a king, but he chose to not run again or not be elected again as the president. And so it was actually very powerful. I remember years ago when we were in DC, we had a chance to go to his tomb at Mount Vernon, and he's buried there. And I remember standing by his tomb thinking about American history and just being part of this large story that is America, and the heroic virtue that Washington had throughout his life. And no man is perfect, but I also think that there was he carried himself in such a way that he inspired other people, inspired other men. And I think that's part of what I'm also drawn to. I was also thinking, as we were thinking about this question about heroic men, I thought, of course, John Paul II immediately. He was one of my major heroes of the faith. His ability to, especially focus on the value of the human person. I've been really struck by that in studying his thought and the importance, especially as he looked at fighting Nazism, communism, and then what he brought into the life of the church over his 27-year pontificate, the theology of the body, his great mind. He's always one of those heroic figures. And clearly, we know why he's a saint, just by the way he lived his life. But I think that there's such a powerful story and message, even at the end of his life, as he was dying, that powerful image I kind of is etched in my mind. He could barely speak. He finally gave his blessing to the world. And I remember feeling like I had lost a father that time. It was a spiritual father, of course. And it was a strange sort of events for me. The Pope died, I think it was April 2nd of 2005. And then on April 19th, we had a new Holy Father elected in Benedict. And on that same day, I actually lost my own father. My father was killed in an accident very day. In fact, during the time that I was at Mass celebrating with my, I celebrated with my family a little bit because it was in the morning the Pope was elected, at least in our time. I was working in the Archdiocese of Portland at the time. And I remember going into Mass and midday or something, went to Mass and then got to work. And then I got a phone call. My wife said, your father has been killed in an accident. Well, she didn't tell me that. She just said, come home. It's important. She didn't tell me anything. So I had a 20-minute drive home wondering what's going on. Yeah, it was powerful. So I moved from like Washington to JP2 to then the guys in my life that are the witnesses of heroic virtue. And I jotted down a few just things and people in my life that I look to, getting back to that kind of stability and ability as I love the idea. The philosopher Seneca, I looked this up because I thought it was beautiful. He's a Stoic philosopher. Seneca said, the bravest sight in the world is to see a great man struggling against adversity. So I just find that beautiful. There's something heroic about the struggle against adversity when we're up against it, when you're faced with something difficult. that idea of being able to build that fortitude, if you will. There's a great aspect, I think, of even Thomas Aquinas is thinking of the building of the virtue of fortitude connected to being a heroic man. And it's facing those things, I think, in difficulty. So I was thinking about particularly some guys in my life. I was thinking, of course, my dad, who he kind of died with his boots on. He worked really hard. My dad was a quiet type, kind of quiet waters run deep kind of guy. And he always talked about his ability to provide for his family as a huge part of his identity and his mission to us as his children, to my mom. And to lose my dad was big. That was made a big impact in my life. I went through a couple of years of really kind of some emotional struggle, some physical struggle, and got out of that and found, though, a really value, because most of my life I'd been kind of a neck up kind of guy, like really thoughtful, bookish, love to study, love to think. And my way for coping with my dad was his loss was to go to the library and check out about 25 books on death and dying. And that didn't work so well because I wasn't dealing with my emotions. I kind of pushed some stuff down. So several months in, I remember having a major panic attack and not dealing with my dad's death and his loss. So my dad was big, but my dad was a hero for me. He always was there for us as a family. I got to a point where I was thinking about all the things I had lost when I lost my dad. But after a while, I had to make a decision whether to get, as I say, you either get better or bitter. And so I wanted to get better and not bitter. And so for getting the getting better part was one where I had to realize that my dad had left me a legacy. He had left me something that I needed to think about. What were the qualities? What were the things that he wanted to pass on to me? And of course, that was the fortitude, the hard work, the ability to supply, care for your family, loving your family and their needs. And that in itself is heroic, especially in today's day and age where so many men, they will have sex with a woman and then they will not commit to her. They will not commit to their children. And I think there's something very heroic about the man who says, I'm going to stay, I'm going to love you through thick and thin, through the difficulties. And so I think that's a really important lesson that my dad taught me. I also thought about my brother, heroic story of my brother. He's a fireman. And I've always thought I just never could do that job. Is an amazing thing to me, just for what you see as a fireman, because you see a lot of pain, you see a lot of brokenness, you see a lot of death. And so that's one of the things my brother has done very well in trying to be honest also about his own weakness, because my brother now, he's been a fireman probably 25 plus years. Wow. And became a captain a couple of years ago. And now it's been interesting to me. He's taking those experiences with him and in a heroic way, being very honest with the men that he works with about a PTSD, because it's something that he has himself experienced. And I think that's a very heroic thing, because that's another way that we, particularly men, sometimes define heroism as about, gutting it out, toughing it out. The only way that you're going to truly be a man is to cry no tears. And I don't think that's true for what a true hero will do. And so my brother's a hero for me because of his work as a fireman and the work that he's done with particularly helping other men who are in those helping professions, the rescuers, the men on the front lines, the soldiers. He's been helping those guys with the PTSD question. And so my hat goes off to my brother. He's a personal hero for me, and a shout out to him today because today is his birthday. And so I'm praying for him and thinking of him today, especially as we talk about heroes. Because I told him the other day, he called me up because he just got done with a session with some men, and he and I were chatting about memories, childhood memories, and how important it is for especially these guys who are healing to think back on childhood memories and to reminisce. It's a beautiful way for your mind and brain to heal. So he was practicing without me a little bit, and we were remembering our childhoods, and we were talking about what that was like. And I thought that was just very, very powerful. And I told him on the phone, I said, my brother's name is Tim. I said, Tim, you are a hero to me. You are truly a hero to me. And I do want to let you know that. And I think a lot of men need to hear that. They need to hear that they're heroes in their own families. And so Father's Day, hey, it's coming up this weekend. It's okay to tell your dad that he's your hero. It's okay. That will definitely fill his heart with a lot of love and compassion. Also, two other guys I wanted to share, just other local heroes for me. One is my father-in-law. My father-in-law was a really good Catholic man. In fact, jokingly, we said that he was an industrial strength Catholic. He always wanted to do things the right way, and especially in liturgy. And I always was admired him because he would quietly say his rosary every day. And for me, that was something that was always showing me a value to where his faith was, where he put his faith. And his daily rosaries inspired me. So last year I went on retreat. And so I've committed since it was July 25th. It's actually my feast day, the Feast of St. James. I committed to saying a daily rosary, and I've been on that track ever since. We're going back to that same retreat this coming month, and it will be a year for me of saying the rosary faithfully in a daily fashion. And I was inspired especially by my father-in-law, who was very much a hero of the faith to me. Amazing man, really took the time for people, being present to them. And I think that's another thing that real heroes do, is that they stop and they take time for other people. They're not about their own agenda oftentimes. They're about how they can help and serve others. And I think that's what a real hero does. And then finally, recently, a couple years ago, I lost my uncle. His name was Ed. Ed had a fairly quick battle with bone cancer. And watching him and being with him, I was his power of attorney for healthcare issues, and being with him in those situations was sobering. It was beautiful. I remember sharing some stories with him as we talked, and some of the things he was proud of in his work as a man. And he talked about, and particularly, there's a special bridge here in Idaho, and it's a bridge that goes over a very large kind of canyon area. And they redid this bridge, and he was on the striping crew to stripe the highway at the time. So he's a highway worker, hardworking guy, but also had a lifelong struggle with mental health issues. And he and I chatted about that a little bit. And I said, what were you proudest of? And he goes, one of the proudest moments for me was I got to put the stripes on that brand new bridge that they built. And he felt like he was part of something bigger, and he had one role to play. But that's a really important thing about being a hero too, is that you realize what your role is to play. And my uncle especially did that. So I always like to say heroes are people or persons who do extraordinary things in ordinary ways. So I think we do these extraordinary things, we do them ordinarily. And I think their lives really bespeak that. So from Washington to my Uncle Ed, I'm thinking about those heroes in my life to try to find those men that really are heroes for me. And they teach me a lesson, something I'm to take away and to try to live out in my own life. But we just have to have the eyes to see that. And we have to take that breath, which I'm going to do now and let you say something, but just shared a lot there. But those are just some heroes for me.
An amazing lineup, and thank you for walking through them. I like what you said. You said a hero is somebody who does extraordinary things in ordinary ways. I mean, you just share too many people to walk through and talk through. But I am interested actually to go back to Washington. It seems that you have like you said, you've done a lot of reading. It seems that there's how do I say, an understanding of some of the most virtuous of the ancient Roman generals. And it seems that, what's his name? Lincoln modeled his behavior on how a lot of them would operate. Like they would take power for a time period, they would serve the Senate, they would serve the people of Rome, and then they would return back to their farm. And I like how you picked specific aspects of his life that sound like they really stand out to you. Someone from a sort of humble, earthy starting point, and then finding a way to try to hold a nation together and manage the difficulties of the position. So I'm curious to then ask you, with that definition you gave of heroism, as someone doing extraordinary things in ordinary ways, how does you stop Lincoln from being kind of a superhero, unapproachable, epic figure in your mind, and sort of reground him back into being somebody that you can actually understand from the inside out and walk with? Because a lot of these heroes, the way they're painted, they're larger than life. They're often, massive statues, gorgeous paintings, and we look at them and we feel very small compared to how massive they were. And they probably felt exactly the same way to those who came before them. And so now as we practice perhaps the discipline of paying attention to them to try to learn and embody what they do, how do you make sense of that? How do you take that inspiration so that he feels real to you and not just an ideal because he was a man?
Sure. And you said Lincoln, but did you mean Washington?
Excuse me. I was,
Yeah.
I meant Washington. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I like Lincoln too. I don't know as much about Lincoln, but that's good. I think one of the things I was struck by in reading the McCullough take in the book 1776 about Washington was that in some ways, we do put these guys, especially heroes, on pedestals. And I know we do that a lot in our culture, especially with sports figures. That tends to be the thing, I think, more than sometimes even the militaristic part of things, especially for guys. It's like we have sports heroes that they put them on pedestals. and then we find out something about them, maybe morally or spiritually, that we don't like, and it sort of like jars us a little bit because we there's that tendency, like in Moses' time, when Moses comes down with the mountain with the commandments, and there's a short reprieve, and it goes away, and then all of a sudden they've turned back to the golden calf. So there's this tendency sometimes for us to want that tangible thing to look to, and we've got to make sure that these people are icons and not idols. And I think that's really important. The icon goes through itself to something greater. And so Washington should represent the values of, especially from a Christian perspective, what are the values of Christ? What are the values of our Christian faith? And how did he embody those? And I think what keeps me grounded is something like the history of that person. Because as I said, he is a great man, but then I was reading about his life a little bit, and then McCullough makes mention of his kind of preoccupation with his own estate, the things of the world a little bit. He wanted things a certain way. I could tell that he wanted to invest a lot in his own property. And so that whole landowning part of it, and maybe his probably meticulous mindset around how his estate wanted to go. Maybe those things maybe are a little too worldly in some ways, and that they just make us understand it better. And then, sometimes the berating of his soldiers. I mean, I think there was I was kind of struck by, there was a couple of passages about, don't spare the lash or even the gun to them if they're going to step out of line and not be part of this. So there's a little bit of a harshness to him that I didn't realize was there as well. In reading something about his life. So I think the point is that we're both sinner and saint, as all of us walk this path. And when we have people in our lives that are our heroes, it's good for us to see the humanity of them and their brokenness and try to learn from that. And I've tried to do that in my own life, of my own dad and my father-in-law and other people who've been close to me, asking that question about, it gets back to my comment about my own dad's, what did he leave me? I think I was losing a bunch of stuff, but I actually was gaining some stuff too. And there are things that my dad did maybe in his parenting that I have tried to do differently, but I also see my dad coming out of me too, and how I maybe deal with things. So I think it's good for us to be realistic about it and just learn about their lives too, because there's a whole, we like to write what they say, a hagiography. It's like we talk about the saints in a beautiful way. Yeah, right. And a hagiography can be good. Like there's stories attributed to saints and things that, well, did this happen or did it not, or did it happen, or are we sure? We're not sure. So those kinds of things I think are important for us to be realistic about our hagiography.
I liked the mention you made earlier about a hero being somebody who is able to, what was it? Have space, or to be able to reach out to other men, something like that. And that put an image in my mind of like Maximus Decimus Meridius, right, from Gladiator. In the opening scenes, he's walking through the lines of his soldiers and how devoted they are to him, because as much as he has going on, he's able to reach out and recognize and name each one as his brothers, his sons, his friends, and so on. So talking about learning things and letting go of things, the next question we like to ask is, what's one of the darkest moments in your life that you ever had to deal with it? How did you get through it? Not that it necessarily makes you think of yourself as a hero, but what it does do is it helps some of the rest of us get to know you, in how do you handle life? How did you make sense of, and maybe what did you learn, from that? So first question, that was a bunch, but what's one of the darkest moments that you've ever had to go through?
Yeah, I mean, I think I alluded to it with my dad's death. That was probably one of the most difficult moments for me, was realizing sudden loss has a great impact on people, and you don't realize how traumatized you are until something like that happens. My father he had worked in the Army Guard, National Guard for years, and then he retired from that. And then he was out for a while, just retired, doing the retirement thing. And then he wanted to get back and just earn a little bit of extra money. And so he got a job doing some tree recycling. And so they were down at the riverbank and they were felling trees. And then my dad was in charge of chopping these trees up in these large chipping machines. And so what happened was that there was a choke chain on one of the logs that went through, and it went into the machine, shot out, and hit my dad about 1,500 miles an hour and hit him in the head and chest. So he died actually on the scene there. He did not live very long because it hit him, and it was, blunt force trauma, and he died there. And so I think for me that was probably the most difficult thing I've ever had to face in terms of, number one, the loss of your own father, because that's a big thing for any man. And I think it's that thing I've often heard that, you don't really become a true man or full man until you lose your father. And so that there was this whole process for me of, coming to grips with that, coming to terms with his loss, but also my own manhood and what that meant for me to having lost him. And so I went through a period, probably about a year and a half, 2 years of some major emotional, physical stuff going on. I had several panic attacks. I remember my wife taking me to the hospital after one major panic attack, and the doctor is inquiring, he goes, well, do you have anything, difficult or traumatic happen? Because I thought I was having a heart attack, and it's like, no, it wasn't a heart attack. It was a major panic attack, which is, again, we think, particularly as men, that we have to define or redefine this thing about being a hero. Is like, well, I can't be weak. I can't show vulnerability.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to redefine what those things look like, especially, I'm a pretty young married man still at this time. So I have young kids. I have 3 little daughters at the time. And I needed to also get it together for them. But I was blessed in a way. I think that my faith was such an important part of this whole journey for me. I don't know where I would be actually without my faith. There were things, especially in and through prayer, that I received that I think were divine consolation. One thing that happened to me, especially in light of what was going to be happening to me in terms of preparing for the suffering I was going to have, is about a month after my dad died. Really 2 things. So two quick stories, because I think they're beautiful and they illustrate how I processed this. One was, we buried my dad. This was April. I came back. I was working in the Archdiocese of Portland doing, I was running also an aging ministry office, and we were doing a caregivers conference. So I had a whole room full of caregivers, people who do communion calls, who are involved in ministry at that level, pastoral care ministry in the church. And so I had 150 people in the room who were definitely had big hearts and cared for me and what I was going through. And one woman in particular came up to me and said, I'd love to speak to you. And so at the end of the day, she grabbed me and we were talking, and she was consoling me because she knew that something was going on. She basically had kind of a message for me, and she handed me a little medal. And on the medal, it had a picture of Our Lady kneeling at the cross. And in that, she says to me, my mom had a little pet phrase, and she was consoling me. My mom had a little pet phrase, I love you. I like the Tweety bird. And if you've heard that before, the I love you, the WUV, I love you. And I stopped and my mouth went open. And I said, what did you say? And she goes, I love you. And she was explaining to me how much Our Lady loved me, and she understood what it was like to lose a loved one. She was close to me, especially through my suffering. And then she told me these words, and I said, well, you have to understand, those are the last words that my dad told my mom. He had written them in a card to my mom, wrote the very words, I love you. And she had no idea she knew nothing of it. And I realized that my mother Mary in heaven the Queen of Heaven was looking over me, was going to prepare me for some suffering that I needed to do. And then about a month after that, I was praying to God. I said, I need to know my dad's okay. And I had a dream about him doing some work, and he asked to be left alone. And this was my kind of, if anything, kind of my nod to purgatory, saying that he was doing some work. He was working some stuff out. And then probably a week later, after that dream, he came to me in a dream and actually saw my dad. It was like a lucid, like kind of a lucid dream. It's just as real as our conversation right now. He came to me and he kind of descended, and he walks up to me. He's probably about 35, 40 years of age. And he was wearing this outfit that he often loved. And then he had on these dark glasses, and he was kind of an aura. And then he kind of spoke to me with not using words. It was like telepathy. He just spoke to me, the words, and he shows me his hands, and he says, my hands are clean now. So he shows me his hands. My hands are clean now. Being a mechanic, he is always like a grease monkey, as they say, and his fingers were always dirty. And so I think there was something spiritual going on there. And then he says to me at the end, he goes, abide in the Father's love. He told me to abide in the Heavenly Father's love. And then he went away. He kind of shot up like a child of the light, and he left. And so these were things that helped prepare me for the suffering I was going to go through. And I think a lot of it, my takeaway from all that suffering and the heroic part is the work that we often do inside is so important. You know, oftentimes I think men, we're like, well, what are we doing out here to prove ourselves in the world? But so much of what we do internally is so important. And for me, that was the integration. I call it the three parts of the person, you know, the gut, the heart, and the mind. And I was such a mind person that I wasn't dealing with my heart and my gut. And so really the death of my father led me to begin this process, this journey, if you will, of trying to integrate my head and my heart and my gut. So that kind of threefold path, kind of coming this way, kind of up through my heart and into my mind, or down from my mind to my heart. And so I think that was actually a real blessing for me as I have dealt with something very difficult. And that helped me then in 2018, which was a kind of another segue into another kind of difficult time in my life, is that my wife in 2018, December, was complaining of some neck pain, et cetera. And we took her in, and she wanted to go in to get kind of checked out. She thought, I'll go to the chiropractor and see if I can get this fixed. And she goes, no, I think I need to go to the emergency room. So she went to the emergency room, and the doctor came in and said, yeah, you've got some stuff going on with your heart. And so that next morning, they were going to do a catheterization of my wife's heart to see what's going on. And then my wife died on the table. She coded blue, and then the doctor brought her back. He got it. It's just like classic television. You'd see the crash cart coming in, and then boom, and he hits her on the back, and I think at the front and the back, and then gets her heart going again. Come to find out, she had like an anomaly on her heart, and it created a problem with the electrical flow, and then she ended up getting a pacemaker and a defibrillator implanted 2 days later. But that was a point for me, like if I had not done the work before about head and heart stuff, I think I would have been a big mess. And then luckily my wife, you know, she's lived and we've had some great years since 2018, just now celebrating our 29th anniversary. But for me, that head and heart and emotional piece, I don't know what that would have done to me without having had that other experience with my dad. So those are probably the most difficult things I've gone through: the death of my dad, and then of course the near death of my wife, and the blessing of getting her back in a beautiful way. My daughter jokingly. My second daughter, is kind of a comedian. She goes, well, Dad, isn't it till death do you part? And don't you have to get remarried to Mom now? No, it doesn't work. You're just mostly dead. She was just mostly dead, like in the
Princess Bride. Yep.
Princess Bride. So anyway, those are the two times I think that I really try to connect.
Thank you there's such a lot of detail and depth in these answers. If we had more time, I would have so many more questions. I actually would like to really go back to one thing that you said and how you think about it, what you make sense of it. You said something like, what was it? A man isn't really a man until his dad has died. It's like a mantle has passed from one to another, like an energy charge or a role, or reality now shifts or something like this. What do you think about that? How do you make sense of that?
Yeah, I think you always have to kind of, well, at least for me, I've had to own my own masculinity since then. I think there's a lot of times before, and I noticed this especially when I was first starting out, and I was always kind of looking for my boss to be my mentor. You're like, you mentor me through this, help me, teach me, doing that sort of thing. And at a certain point, you just have to realize that as a man, you have to be a man. And then when you lose your father, who's supposed to be this built-in mentor, it really pushes that envelope. And you really have to come to a decision point in your life of saying, am I choosing this for myself? And, you do it because I think you look to other men because you're unsure of yourself. And there's a development of that. But even today, and maybe it's not true, maybe it is true, but I find that I also find a lot of encouragement on male figures that are father-like figures to me, that are older men, maybe even than myself, that I look to. But there's a certain point, I guess what I'm saying is there's a certain part where that's a dividing line. And once you step over that line, you realize now it's my job to begin to think about mentoring and caring for and doing the role that my own father did. That I'm no longer the son. I am the son, but I'm no longer just that. I have to take on this mantle of the fatherly care of other people. And so sometimes that's a lonely job. And sometimes you, as a father, you are to protect your family. You take the arrows for your family. Sometimes you take arrows from your own family members, your wife, your kids. And that part of that arrow taking is one in which I think if you've done that work and you come to peace with your dad, which is one of the things I had to do, I had to kind of come to peace with my dad, that I ended up then just saying to myself, this is who I am as a man, and you stand in that. And then it's not that you do that all alone, because you continue to grow, but there is a dividing line, in my opinion, and it's something that every man has to eventually say, am I still the son, or am I truly taking on that fatherly role and mentoring and passing on what you've been given? And I think that's the part, maybe that's the difference. The son is the one that's always seeking to figure out, how can I fill this up so I know who I am? And then once that's been defined, our role then is not just to keep it to ourselves. Our role as a father is to give it away in love. And I think that's the dividing line, if you will, between being a son and a father. And so we again, in our own lives, we have that opportunity that we're always sons in God. We always get to receive from the Lord to get ourselves filled up so that we can then give that back. And I think that's a really important thing we realize, is that in relationship to God, we are that son, and he really is our father, and he's the one trying to guide us along that path. But that's just an important thing. It is that passing on. It's that rite of passage that often men need. And I think I needed that for my dad. I think that's why he came to me in that dream, because he was passing that mantle on, saying, son, you've got what it takes. And I think that's what every man wants to hear, is like, you got what it takes to do the kind of love I'm asking you to do, the kind of self-giving, generous love that I'm asking you to give to other people. So I don't know. I'm kind of unpacking that with you, but I think that's kind of how I would talk about that line in the sand, that change that happens from being a father from a son to a father.
Yeah. There's that moment where the son realizes that a part of him was relying on somebody else, your dad, to complete your identity. And there's a moment where the training wheels have to come off and we stand on our own feet, so that we now become the one who gives out to others the way the father was to us. Have you ever read the book Iron John?
Yeah, I've read parts of it. Yeah,
Okay.
I've read parts of that. Yeah, that
Hints
was
of what you're
actually
saying
big in
echoes
that
of
was
that.
big in the 80s. Yeah,
It was, yeah. I reread it a couple of years back with a couple of our team members. We were just privately reading it together. And anyhow, goodness. So last question then for you. Who do you dream of being or desire to be a hero for? And the caveats are you can't use the God card or your family, because those are givens. But in your life, who do you wish to be a hero for?
Well, I guess what's interesting, just a little personal history again. We've never done a Crucio until this year. I don't know if you know the Crucio movement at all.
Only
Went on a
vaguely.
Crucio. Yeah, went on a Crucio, and part of Crucio is what they call the fourth day, which is the ongoing meeting of men, especially for this group, it's men. So since January, I've been involved with a small faith community, small group. There's 4 of us now meeting. There's kind of 3 older guys, and there's a younger guy in the group who's 23. And in some ways, if I could be a hero for him, maybe talking about the things that we have already shared, how can I share my experience with him? How can I love this young man, who's 23 years old, now just newly engaged, now just trying to figure things out. And this young man is super wise already, but he's coming and he's finding other men that he can connect with that are older than him, that have a little more life experience. And I can just see him kind of sucking in our wisdom and our sharing, and him processing this. And I think that's a really important thing for what Heroic Men is doing, what the Catholic Leadership Alliance is doing, is how are we connecting these men together so that we've got this intergenerational heroism that gets passed down. That's something that, especially for men, that's a mantle that needs to be handed on. And like I say, we want to encourage him as older men and seeing him come up the ranks. So definitely would want to be heroic for him, for the younger generation coming through. I have all daughters, so I also want to be, I'm fudging a little bit, but on the family question, I want to be a hero for the men that are going to be marrying my daughters too, that they can come to me and say, gosh, how did you do this? Or how did you live through this? Because they're all going to have brand new experiences as well. So I want to be heroes to those younger men in my life, especially those men who are going to be marrying my daughters, because I think that's a really important point. I'm fudging a little bit on the family thing, but I think that's who I would say. I love this. St. Thomas talks about magnanimity and looking for magnanimity. That's greatness in men. And it's something I look for. I look for this greatness in a man, this idea, and I love it. Heroic virtue is virtue practiced with excellence and consistency, especially under trial. And so that's what I look for. There's another guy in our group who's been through many, many trials, and I see his deepening relationship with the Lord, and I see a magnanimity in his heart and a generosity that I think is part and parcel of what it really means to be a hero. Because being a hero, you're laying down your life for that other. And I think that's totally Jesus says it. He says, greater love has no one than this, than to lay down his life for one's friends. And I think that's what heroes do. And I think that what Jesus is calling each of us as men to do is to lay down our lives, because we don't lose it. We actually gain it. We gain it back. And that's something that my father taught me too. He lost his life, physically lost his life, but I know that he is giving back so much more spiritually to me now. I have a closer relationship in many ways to my dad now, especially through the Eucharist, than maybe I did when he was with me. So that's, I guess I would say, those are the guys that I would want to be a hero to.
Thanks for joining us on Heroic Stories. If this story connected with you, send it to someone. And if you want to chat with us about anything that we've said, head on over to our community at heroicmen.org. We're here for every man out there who feels they're made for more, has the faith to step up, and doesn't know what to do. Come and share your journey with us. Can I share something about a group of men like you? The Heroic Men app is powered by an alliance of supporters. They step up so that others can access life-changing content and community at no cost. Right now, there's another man out there who needs stories and content like this. Maybe he can't even afford a bus fare to Mass. Maybe it's a teen questioning if he matters at all. And maybe it's a father searching for real brotherhood. Your $5 a month covers his ability to access this content. One more soul reached, one more life changed. $5 a month, that's it. If you can, consider paying it forward today. And if you can't, share Heroic Men with another man. That alone could bring another man back to faith in Jesus Christ. And here's how we give even more back to you. Every donor is welcome to join an exclusive group inside our online community. We want to learn from you and work with you to strengthen men so that no man is left behind. Visit heroicmen.org today to stand with us. Someone paid it forward for you. Now will you do the same?